Welcome back to Boni's Life, where we dive deep into the questions that shape our world. Today, we're tackling one of the most controversial and consequential questions of our time. Is the United States a declining empire? This isn't about politics or ideology. It's about facts, data, and historical patterns that have played out across centuries of human civilization. Before we begin, let me be clear about what we're doing here. We're not rooting for anyone's decline or celebrating anyone's rise. We're simply examining the evidence with the same analytical rigor that historians use to study the Roman Empire or the British Empire. Because here's the thing, understanding these patterns isn't just academic curiosity. It affects everything from your investments to your career choices to the world your children will inherit. So grab your coffee, settle in, and let's explore one of the most important questions of the 21st century. And if you find this analysis valuable, please hit that subscribe button and ring the notification bell. It really helps the channel reach more people who are hungry for this kind of deep, fact-based analysis. When we ask whether America is a declining empire, we first need to define what we mean by empire. The United States doesn't have colonies in the traditional sense. It doesn't directly rule over foreign territories like the British Empire did with India or the Roman Empire did with Gaul. But modern scholars use a broader definition of empire, one that includes informal control through economic dominance, military presence, and cultural influence. By this definition, the United States has been the world's dominant empire since 1945. It has over 750 military installations in more than 80 countries. The US dollar serves as the world's primary reserve currency, making up over 60% of global foreign exchange reserves. American companies dominate global markets, American universities attract the world's brightest minds, and American culture, from Hollywood movies to social media platforms, shapes how billions of people see the world. But empires, as history teaches us, don't last forever. Every great power that has ever existed has eventually declined. The question isn't whether American dominance will end. It's when, how, and what comes next. To understand where America might be heading, we need to look at how empires have risen and fallen throughout history. Fortunately, we have some excellent frameworks to guide us. Sir John Bargot Glubb, a British military officer and historian, studied 11 major empires spanning from the Assyrians in 859 BC to the British Empire in 1950 AD. He found that empires typically go through 7 distinct stages, each lasting about 10 generations or roughly 250 years. The first stage is the age of pioneers, the initial burst of expansion and conquest. Think of America's westward expansion in the 18th and 19th centuries. The second stage is the age of conquests, where the empire expands its territory through military might. For America, this was the Spanish-American War, World War I, and World War II, which established it as a global power. The third stage is the age of commerce, where the empire focuses on economic development and trade. This was America's post-World War II economic boom. The fourth stage is the age of affluence, peak wealth, and prosperity. You could argue this was America in the 1980s and 1990s. The fifth stage is the age of intellect, marked by cultural and intellectual development. America's technological leadership in the internet age fits this pattern. But then comes the sixth stage, the age of decadence. This is where things get uncomfortable for Americans to hear. According to Glubb, the age of decadence is characterized by defensiveness and pessimism, materialism and frivolity, an influx of foreigners, welfare state development, weakening of religion, and a loss of sense of duty. Sound familiar? The final stage is the age of decline and collapse. Now, before you start panicking or celebrating, depending on your political views, remember that these are patterns, not laws of physics, but they're patterns that have held remarkably consistent across different cultures, time periods, and geographical regions. Let's start with the numbers because numbers don't lie. As of the first quarter of 2025, the United States has a debt to GDP ratio of 121%. To put that in perspective, that's higher than the peak debt level America reached during World War II, which was 106% of GDP. The Congressional Budget Office projects that the federal budget deficit will be $1.9 trillion in 2025. That's trillion with a T. To understand how massive this is, consider that the entire GDP of countries like Canada or Russia is around $2 trillion. America is borrowing nearly the entire economic output of a major developed nation every single year. But here's where it gets really concerning. The debt isn't just high, it's accelerating. The federal debt limit was reinstated at $36.1 trillion on January 2nd, 2025. By the time you're watching this video, it's probably even higher. The CBO projects that debt will reach 118% of GDP by 2035, and that's assuming no major economic shocks or new spending programs. This isn't just an abstract number. When Paul Kennedy, the Yale historian who coined the term imperial overstretch, studied the decline of great powers, he found that fiscal crisis was almost always a key factor. Empires fall when they can no longer afford to maintain their commitments. Consider the Roman Empire. To fund endless foreign wars and domestic spending, Rome devalued its currency, creating a hidden tax on its people. The empire's finances became what economists would now call a Ponzi scheme, borrowing money to pay the interest on previous borrowing. Sound familiar? The British Empire faced a similar crisis. The costs of World War I and World War II devastated British finances. By 1947, Britain was so financially exhausted that it could no longer afford to maintain its empire. Within 2 decades, most of the British Empire had dissolved. Now look at America's situation. The country spends $962 billion on defense in 2025, nearly 4 times what China spends and almost 40% of all global military expenditures. That's more than the next 9 countries combined. Meanwhile, the economy contracted by 0.5% in the first quarter of 2025, the first contraction since 2022. Military overextension is another classic sign of imperial decline. The United States currently maintains over 750 military installations in more than 80 countries around the world. American forces are deployed from Germany to Japan, from the Middle East to Africa, from the Arctic to the Pacific. This global military presence comes with enormous costs and not just financial ones. The military is facing recruitment challenges across all branches. Young Americans are increasingly reluctant to serve, partly due to concerns about endless foreign wars, and partly due to a disconnect between military and civilian culture. But the bigger problem is strategic overextension. America's military commitments were largely established when the country had a much larger share of global GDP and faced fewer serious competitors. In 1945, America produced about 50% of the world's economic output. Today, it's about 25% and falling. Meanwhile, potential adversaries are developing what military strategists call anti-access area denial capabilities. These are weapons and technologies designed to make it extremely costly for the United States to project power in contested regions, China's military modernization, Russia's hypersonic weapons, and Iran's missile capabilities all fall into this category. The result is that America's military dominance, while still overwhelming in absolute terms, is becoming more expensive to maintain and less decisive in potential conflicts. This is exactly the pattern that Paul Kennedy identified in his study of imperial overstretch. Perhaps even more concerning than the economic and military challenges is America's political dysfunction. The country is more polarized than at any time since the Civil War. Trust in institutions is at historic lows. Congress has an approval rating that hovers around 20%, and Americans increasingly view their political opponents not as fellow citizens with different views, but as enemies of the Republic. This matters for empire because effective governance requires the ability to make hard choices and stick to long-term strategies. When the political system is paralyzed by partisan gridlock, it becomes impossible to address fundamental challenges. Consider America's infrastructure. The American Society of Civil Engineers gives the country's infrastructure a grade of C- and estimates that $2.6 trillion in investment is needed by 2029. But political dysfunction makes it nearly impossible to pass major infrastructure spending, even though both parties claim to support it. The same pattern applies to fiscal policy. Everyone knows that the debt trajectory is unsustainable, but no politician wants to be the one to propose the spending cuts or tax increases necessary to fix it. So the problem gets worse every year. This is remarkably similar to what happened in the late Roman Empire. Political institutions became increasingly dysfunctional as different factions fought for power rather than addressing the empire's fundamental challenges. The result was a series of civil wars that weakened the empire and made it vulnerable to external threats. So how does America's situation compare to previous empires at similar stages of decline? The parallels are striking, but so are the differences. Like Rome, America faces fiscal crisis, military overextension, and political dysfunction. Like the British Empire, America is seeing its relative economic power decline as other nations industrialize and modernize. Like the Soviet Union, America is struggling with the costs of maintaining a global empire while dealing with internal social and economic problems. But there are also crucial differences. Unlike historical empires, America operates in a nuclear age, which fundamentally changes the dynamics of great power competition. Direct military confrontation between nuclear powers is essentially unthinkable, which provides a kind of stability that didn't exist in previous eras. America also benefits from what scholars call power preponderance. The country's lead in military technology, economic size, and cultural influence is so large that it discourages other nations from directly challenging American dominance. China may be rising, but it's still decades away from matching American military capabilities. Perhaps most importantly, America is a democracy with strong institutions and a federal system that provides resilience. When the Roman Empire faced crisis, it had no mechanism for peaceful leadership change. When the British Empire faced challenges, it was constrained by rigid class structures and imperial commitments. America, for all its problems, has shown a remarkable ability to reinvent itself throughout its history. No discussion of American decline would be complete without examining China's rise. In 1980, China's economy was smaller than Italy's. Today, it's the world's second largest economy, and by some measures already larger than America's when adjusted for purchasing power. China's military modernization has been equally impressive. The People's Liberation Army has transformed from a peasant army into a high-tech force capable of challenging American dominance in the Western Pacific. China's Belt and Road Initiative is creating economic and political ties across Asia, Africa, and Europe that could eventually rival American influence. But China also faces enormous challenges. Its population is aging rapidly, with the working age population already shrinking. The country has massive debt problems of its own, with total debt to GDP approaching 300%. China's authoritarian system, while efficient in some ways, lacks the legitimacy and adaptability of democratic systems. Most importantly, China's rise doesn't necessarily mean America's fall. The global economy isn't a zero-sum game. Both countries can prosper simultaneously, though they will likely compete for influence in various regions. While historical patterns are instructive, it's important to recognize that America's situation is unique in several ways. First, this is the first time in history that a global empire has existed in the nuclear age. The existence of weapons capable of destroying civilization changes the calculus of great power competition in fundamental ways. Second, the global economy is more integrated than ever before. American companies don't just sell to American consumers, they're embedded in global supply chains that make economic warfare extremely costly for all parties. China may be America's strategic competitor, but it's also one of America's largest trading partners. Third, America's empire is largely informal. Unlike the British Empire, which had to maintain direct control over colonies, America exercises influence through economic relationships, military alliances, and cultural appeal. This makes American dominance more flexible and potentially more durable. Fourth, America's federal system and democratic institutions provide mechanisms for adaptation that didn't exist in previous empires. When Rome faced crisis, the only solution was often civil war. When America faces crisis, it can change leadership through elections and adapt policies through democratic processes. Based on historical patterns and current trends, we can identify several possible scenarios for America's future. The first is managed decline, a gradual transition from unipolar dominance to being a major power in a multipolar world. This is essentially what Paul Kennedy predicted in 1987, and it's probably the most likely scenario. In this scenario, America remains the world's largest economy and most powerful military. But other powers, particularly China, gain influence in their regions. America would need to be more selective about its commitments and more willing to share leadership with allies and partners. The second scenario is renewal and adaptation. America could address its fundamental challenges through political reform, fiscal discipline, and strategic rebalancing. This has happened before. America emerged from the Great Depression stronger than ever, and it adapted successfully to the end of the Cold War. The third scenario is rapid decline or collapse. This is less likely but not impossible. If America faced a major economic crisis, military defeat, or political breakdown, its global position could erode quickly. The Soviet Union went from superpower to historical footnote in just a few years. The fourth scenario is continued dominance through technological leadership. If America maintains its edge in artificial intelligence, biotechnology, and other emerging fields, it could extend its period of global leadership indefinitely. So, what's the bottom line? Is America a declining empire? The honest answer is that it's complicated. America shows clear signs of relative decline. Its share of global GDP is shrinking, its debt is unsustainable, Its political system is dysfunctional, and its military is overextended. These are the same patterns that preceded the decline of every great power in history. But America also has unique advantages that previous empires lacked. It operates in a nuclear age that makes direct great power conflict unlikely. It has democratic institutions that provide mechanisms for adaptation. It leads in key technologies that could drive future economic growth. And it has a network of allies and partners that no previous empire has enjoyed. The most likely scenario is neither collapse nor permanent dominance, but a gradual transition to a more multipolar world where America remains a major power but no longer enjoys the overwhelming dominance it has had since 1945. What does this mean for you personally? If you're an investor, it suggests diversifying globally rather than betting everything on American markets. If you're planning a career, it suggests developing skills that will be valuable in a multipolar world. If you're a parent, it suggests preparing your children for a world where America is still important but no longer dominant. Most importantly, it suggests staying informed and engaged. The choices that America makes in the next decade will largely determine whether the transition is managed smoothly or results in conflict and instability. And those choices will be made by voters, politicians, and citizens, people like you. That's why channels like this one matter. We need informed citizens who understand these complex issues and can make thoughtful decisions about the future. So if you found this analysis valuable, please subscribe, share it with friends, and join the conversation in the comments. The American empire may be declining, but the American experiment in democracy and freedom is far from over. How that experiment evolves will shape not just America's future, but the future of the entire world, and that's a responsibility we all share. Thanks for watching Boni's Life. I'll see you in the next episode where we'll dive even deeper into the forces shaping our rapidly changing world. Until then, stay curious, stay informed, and keep asking the hard questions.